We should have never gone inside. I know that now. But when you're 17, bored, and invincible, you don't think about what could go wrong. You don't think about what might be waiting in the dark. And by the time you realize it's too late, it started as a dare. Me, Ryan, and Caleb were hanging out in Caleb's basement, scrolling through our phones, trying to figure out what to do. It was a Friday night in a small town, which meant nothing was happening. We had already done the usual fast food runs, looping around town in Ryan's beat-up Jeep, sneaking beers from Caleb's dad's garage fridge. Then Ryan said it. Let's go to Westlake. Westlake High wasn't just abandoned. It was erased. No one talked about it. No one went near it. It had been shut down for years. Something about funding or safety violations, depending on who you asked. Some said there was a fire. Others said it was worse than that. All I knew was the building was still there, rotting on the edge of town, hidden behind a chain-link fence. And no one ever questioned why. It was almost midnight when we got there. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown. The front doors were boarded up, but there was another way in. The old gym doors around back. Kids had been sneaking in for years. Spray painting the walls. Breaking windows. But not recently. Not since the last group that went in never talked about it after. Caleb tested the handle. It was supposed to be locked. It wasn't. The doors swung open with a loud, hollow creak. A gust of stale, freezing air rushed out. Like the building had been holding its breath. Like it was waiting for us. Ryan grinned. After you, gentlemen. Inside, the air was thick. Dust hung in the beams of our phone flashlights. The smell of mold and old paper filled my nose. Westlake looked frozen in time. Chairs overturned. Lockers hanging open. Graffiti scrawled over the walls and whiteboards. But the worst part? It was too quiet. Even abandoned buildings have sounds. The creak of settling beams. The rustle of mice or raccoons. But here? Nothing. Like the school was waiting. Listening. I turned toward the others. So, what now? Ryan smirked. Now we check out room 108. Caleb and I exchanged a look. Why that room? Caleb asked. Ryan's grin widened. Because that's where she died. Everyone in town knew the rumors. The girl who disappeared. Some said she was a student. Others said she was a teacher. But the details were always the same. She went missing one night after school. The janitor found her bag and shoes in room 108. But not her. They searched everywhere. Never found a body. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Like she had just stopped existing. The school shut down not long after. No one ever said why. Caleb swallowed hard. You actually believe that crap? Ryan shrugged. I don't have to believe it. I just have to prove you're both too scared to go. I exhaled. I didn't want to go. But I wasn't about to let Ryan call me a coward. I forced a smirk. Lead the way. The hallway to room 108 was worse than the rest of the school. The air was colder. The walls had deeper scratches. Not spray paint. Not knife marks. Something else. Something desperate. The door was shut. Unlike every other classroom, it had no graffiti. No signs of vandalism. Like even the worst kids in town knew better. Ryan reached for the handle. It turned too easily. The door swung open. And my stomach dropped. Because room 108 wasn't abandoned. Someone had been here. Recently. The desks were arranged in perfect rows. The whiteboard was clean. The chalk tray was lined with fresh, sharpened pencils. And in the center of the room, a single chair faced the doorway. Like it was waiting for us. Caleb muttered, "Dude, we should go." For once, Ryan didn't argue. He took a slow step back, swallowing hard. Then, something tapped. Not from inside the room. From above us. Tap, tap, tap. Like fingernails on metal. We slowly lifted our lights toward the ceiling. The vent above us. Something moved. Something crawling. And then, a hand pressed against the metal grating. Fingers too long. Too thin. Twitching. I froze. And then, from inside the vent, a voice whispered. You shouldn't be here. The whisper from the vent froze me in place. You shouldn't be here. The voice was wrong. Not a girl's voice. Not a person's voice. It was too soft. Too dry. Like something that had been waiting in the dark for too long. Something that had forgotten how to speak. Then, the metal grating bent outward. Like something inside was pushing to get out. And before I could move, a hand shot through the gap. Fingers too long, too thin. Nails ragged and broken. Reaching. Grasping. And that's when we ran. We bolted for the exit. Through the empty halls. Past the lockers, the broken desks, the graffiti-covered walls. Ryan was ahead. Caleb was behind me, and then, Caleb let out a choked gasp. I turned. He was staring at the lockers, his flashlight beam shaking. The metal doors were moving, rattling, shuddering, like something was inside them, like something was trying to get out. Then, bang, a locker swung open on its own. The door dented outward, like something had slammed against it from the inside. I grabbed Caleb's arm. Go! Go now! We reached the main doors, the way we'd come in. Ryan hit the handle, pushed. Nothing. He pushed again. Harder. Still nothing. What the hell? He hissed. I shoved him aside and yanked at the handle. Locked. We were trapped. My breath came out in sharp bursts. We needed another way out. A window, a back door. Then, the footsteps started. Not ours. Not human. Coming from the hallway behind us. Slow. Deliberate. Not one set. Many. Like something had just stepped out of the lockers. Ryan turned. Lifted his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the far end of the hall. And that's when we saw them. They looked like students. Sort of. Their uniforms were old. Faded. Their hair tangled, their skin too pale. But their eyes. Too dark. Like the pupils had swallowed the color. Like they weren't eyes at all. And then, the one in front tilted its head. And whispered, "Sit down. Class isn't over." We turned and ran. Down a side hall. We didn't know where we were going. Just away. We passed the library. The cafeteria. We should have been able to reach the gym doors. The way we came in. But instead, we hit a dead end. A classroom. The door was open. The chairs inside were neatly arranged. And on the whiteboard, written in perfect handwriting, Room 108. That wasn't possible. We had already left that room. It should have been behind us. But somehow, the school had brought us back. The footsteps behind us got louder. The students were coming. There was no time to think. We ran inside. I slammed the door shut, locked it. Ryan and Caleb were panting, pale. I turned, scanning the classroom for another exit. And that's when I saw her, standing at the front of the room, behind the teacher's desk. A woman, dressed in an old blouse and skirt. Her dark hair pulled into a bun, face gray and hollow. She looked at us and smiled. "Take your seats." Her voice was soft, cold, like the whisper in the vent, like the voices in the hall. Ryan shook his head. "And no, we just need to leave." Her smile widened. "Class isn't dismissed yet." And then, the classroom door unlocked, slowly creaked open, and the students from the hall stepped inside. Ryan grabbed the nearest chair and threw it at the window. It bounced off, like the glass wasn't real. Caleb yanked at the side door. Locked. The teacher turned toward the board, picked up a piece of chalk, and in long, slow strokes, she started writing. Her handwriting was perfect. Too perfect. Like she'd written the same thing 1,000 times before. And when she stepped away, we saw what it said. All students must stay until the lesson is over. The lesson never ends. Then, she turned to face us, and we saw her eyes for the first time. Dark, empty, like the students, like she had been here forever, like she had been waiting for us. Ryan tried to move, tried to run, but his legs buckled. He hit the ground hard. His hands trembled. His eyes went glassy, like he had forgotten how to leave. Caleb let out a shaky breath. What's happening to him? The teacher's smile never faded. She gestured to the empty desk at the front of the class. Ryan's desk. Take your seat. Then, she looked at me and said, in a voice too soft, too patient, "It's your turn next." Ryan wasn't moving. His eyes were open but empty. His hands twitched against the desk, his mouth mumbling something I couldn't hear. Like he was somewhere else. Like the classroom had already taken him. The teacher turned to me. Her voice was too calm, too patient. "Your turn." Caleb grabbed my arm. His grip was too tight, too desperate. "We need to get him out of here," he hissed. But the students were moving now. Their faces were still blurred. Wrong. They surrounded Ryan's desk, standing over him. Silent. Watching. Waiting. For me. I took a step forward. "Ryan?" I whispered. He didn't blink. Didn't acknowledge me. Then, slowly, his lips parted. And in a dry, hollow voice, he muttered, "We shouldn't be here." His body jerked violently, like something inside him was struggling to get out. And then, his head snapped toward me. His mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. And he whispered, "Sit down." I turned to run. The students stepped forward. I grabbed Caleb, yanking him toward the side door. It wouldn't budge. I looked back, and the teacher was watching, still smiling. She pointed to an empty chair. "My chair. Take your seat." Caleb grabbed the back of a desk, hefted it ready to throw it at the window. But the second he moved, the students rushed forward. Too fast. Too wrong. They grabbed my arms, my legs, my shoulders, pulled me toward the desk. I fought, kicked, screamed. But the second I touched the chair, my body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, like my limbs had been welded to the seat. And then, the teacher's voice echoed in my head. "Class is in session." And everything went black. I was somewhere else. Not in the classroom. Not anywhere. Just darkness. And in that darkness I saw her. The girl from the story. The one who disappeared. She was standing in front of me. Her skin pale and cracked. Her lips stitched shut. She reached for me. I tried to move, but I couldn't. Her fingers touched my forehead. And suddenly I remembered everything. The school was never abandoned. The students never left. They had been here the whole time, forced to sit in their seats repeating the same lesson forever. Because that was the rule. And the girl? She tried to break the rule. She tried to leave before class was dismissed. So the school swallowed her whole. And now it wanted us to. Her stitched lips parted. And in a voice that was barely a whisper, she said, "Get out before the bell rings." Then, a sound cut through the silence. A sharp, metallic clang. The school bell. Ringing. For the first time in years. And suddenly, I was back in my body. The classroom was different now. The walls twisted. The windows were gone. The students had changed. Their uniforms were rotting. Their faces were sinking inward like something had hollowed them out. And the teacher? She wasn't smiling anymore. Her mouth hung open. Her jaw too wide. Her teeth too sharp. Her voice wasn't human when she spoke. It was a low, guttural rasp. And she said, "You're too late." Then, the bell rang again. The walls shook. The sound of the bell grew louder. The students screamed. The teacher's face split open. Ryan's body twitched. I yanked at the desk, trying to break free. And then, I was falling. The chair snapped away from the floor. The classroom collapsed inward. And I fell straight into the dark. I was falling. Not through air. Not downstairs. Through something thicker. Like I was sinking into the school itself. The walls, the floors, they weren't real anymore. They were alive. And I was being swallowed. I hit the ground hard. My head snapped back. The air smelled wrong. Rotting books. Old sweat. The walls were cement, damp and cracked. This wasn't the classroom. It was something beneath it. Somewhere no one was supposed to go. Somewhere students went missing. And suddenly I wasn't alone. The first thing I saw were the chairs. Rows of them. All facing forward. Desks covered in dust, untouched for decades. And in those chairs were the students. Their backs stiff, their faces pale. Not moving. Not breathing. Frozen in time. Like they had been sitting there forever. Like they had been waiting for the next lesson. And then, slowly, they turned toward me. Every single one. I took a shaking step back. Their eyes were glassy. Dark hollows, like the life had been drained out of them. I knew some of them. I recognized their faces. Names that had been whispered through town. Students who disappeared. Students that were never found. Westlake never closed because of safety violations. It closed because the school kept its students. And now it wanted to keep us too. A dry voice cut through the silence. "You're late for class." The teacher was here, but she wasn't at the front of the room. She was in the corner, standing in the dark. Her skin was wrong, no longer human. Her eyes were hollow sockets. Her arms too long, fingers twitching like spiders. And when she stepped forward, her feet didn't touch the ground. She hovered, like she was a shadow wearing a body. Like she wasn't really here. Or worse, like she was part of the school itself. A chair screeched against the floor. A desk shifted forward. The students were making space. A new seat. For me. I tried to move, but my legs were heavy. Like the floor had wrapped around my ankles. Like the school was deciding for me. And then, the chair was right behind me. I didn't sit. I was pulled. The second I hit the seat, I understood. This was how they got stuck. This was how they disappeared. You sit down and you never get up again. You stay and the world forgets you ever existed. And as the school bell rang again, I felt something clawing into my skin, pulling at my memories, at who I was, at everything that made me me. I turned my head, saw the desk in front of me, scratched into the wood a name, my name, as if I had been sitting here all along, as if I had always belonged here. And suddenly, I couldn't remember what day it was. I couldn't remember why I came here. I couldn't remember my own house, my parents. The school was taking everything. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out, because my voice wasn't mine anymore. And the teacher? She was smiling. Her voice slithered into my head. Lesson 1, there's no way out. And then, a hand grabbed mine. Not the teacher, not the students. Her, the girl from the story. The one who tried to leave. The one who had been swallowed by the school. Her stitches were ripped open now. Her lips moved freely. And she whispered one thing. Break the desk. I didn't think. Didn't question it. I lifted my arms, ignoring the weight pressing me down. I grabbed the edges of the desk. And I slammed it forward. Hard. It splintered. Cracked in half. The moment it broke. The school screamed. Not the students. Not the teacher. The school itself. Like I had just torn open something alive. And suddenly, I could move again. The girl grabbed my hand. Run. Caleb yanked Ryan from his seat. Ryan gasped, choked, like he had been drowning. We ran. Straight for the door. The school was changing now. Walls twisting, melting like wax. The bell screamed in our ears. The students were wailing, falling out of their desks. And then, the walls caught fire. It was real now. Not a rumor. Not a story. Westlake had burned down before. And it was burning again. We hit the stairwell. Smoke filled my lungs. The front doors ahead. Wide open. A way out. The school wanted us to stay. But we were leaving. We burst through the doors. Fell into the grass. And the second we hit the ground, the school was gone. We never talked about it after. Not really. The school was just gone. Nothing left but an empty lot. Like it had never existed. Like it had been waiting for us to come in. Waiting to trap someone new. Ryan doesn't remember everything. Caleb tries to pretend it didn't happen. But I still have nightmares. And sometimes late at night, I hear the school bell. Ringing. Calling me back. And I know one day it will find us again. We should have been safe. We should have been free. But some things don't just disappear. Some things stay with you. Even when you run. Even when you burn them down. And that's when I realized Westlake never needed walls. Because the school was never a place. It was a lesson. And we were still students. A week passed. Then another. We didn't talk about what happened. Not Caleb. Not Ryan. Not me. Westlake was gone. No one remembered it. No one even mentioned it. Like it had never been there at all. Like the town had rewritten itself. Then, one night, it came back. I was at school. A normal school. A school that had never burned down. It was late. Everyone had left. I was alone in the hallway grabbing my jacket from my locker. And that's when I saw it. One locker down. Scratched into the metal a name. Not mine. Ryan's. The metal was old. Rusted. Like it had been here for decades. And then, the door swung open. All on its own. The locker was empty. Except for one thing. A desk. A full-sized school desk shoved into the narrow space. My stomach twisted. I reached out, my hand shaking. Carved into the wood Ryan's name. And under it, something else. A phrase I'd seen before. Something the teacher had said. Class isn't dismissed yet. I stepped back. The air felt thick. Wrong. Then I heard it. A soft tap. Like fingernails on metal. From the inside of the locker. A sound I had heard before. From the vents. From the walls of Westlake. Tap. 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 Then, a voice. Soft. Familiar. But not right. You shouldn't have left me. I slammed the locker shut. Ran out of school. Didn't sleep that night. The next morning I went looking for Ryan. Called. No answer. Texted. No response. I went to his house. His mom answered the door, rubbing her eyes like she'd been crying. I forced a smile. Hey, is Ryan home? She blinked. Her expression changed. Not confusion. Not worry. Just blank. Like she didn't understand the question. Then finally she whispered. Who's Ryan? I felt sick. No, I stammered. Ryan, your son. My friend. She shook her head, a glassy, empty look in her eyes. I don't have a son. And then, before I could speak, She shut the door. I drove to Caleb's house. Told him everything. He thought I was messing with him. Then I pulled out my phone. Opened my camera roll. We had pictures of that night. Stupid selfies. Proof that Ryan had been there. But as I scrolled, every photo was wrong. It was just me and Caleb. No Ryan. Like he had never been with us. Like he had never existed. And then, at the very end of my gallery, a new photo. One I didn't take. It was a picture of a school hallway. Westlake's hallway. And in the center of the frame, Ryan. Sitting at a desk. Face pale. Eyes dark. Mouth stitched shut. And behind him? The teacher. Her face blurred. Her hands on his shoulders. And written on the wall behind them. He's where he belongs. Caleb and I left town that night. We didn't say goodbye. Didn't pack. We just drove. Fast. Far. We don't talk about Westlake. We don't speak Ryan's name. And we never stay in one place too long. Because I know the truth now. The school still exists. Not as a building. Not as a place. But as a rule. And if you break the rule, if you try to leave, it will erase you. Like you were never there. Like you were never born. I don't check my locker anymore. But sometimes in a new town, a new school, I hear it. A soft tapping. From inside the walls. Tap. 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 And when I turn, there's always a new desk. A seat waiting for me. Because my lesson isn't over. Class isn't dismissed yet. And I know one day the school will take me too.